Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. My latest book, Kowabana Volume 12, is now out. Collecting even more of your favourite stories from the show, you can find creepy ghosts, abandoned buildings, haunted shrines, fascinating monsters, and much, much more. You can find that on Amazon right now, and help support the show at the same time. This week, we're looking at creepy tales taking place on both sides of the divide. Horrifying encounters with both the living and the dead. First up, a young boy and his family move into a building that's known to be haunted, but what's really going on there, and can they escape in time? Find out in Ghost Apartment. April 1975. On the first day of 6th grade, Menma transferred to our class. He was naturally friendly and great at making people laugh, so he quickly became our friend. July arrived, and the summer holidays were about to begin. I could barely pay attention in class, and all I could think about was how I was going to spend my time. Everybody else was doing the same. "Why don't you come over to my house today?" The cicadas were chirping noisily outside the window as I was trying to put my swim shorts on over my pants. I was in the middle of figuring out how to get my pants off without accidentally flashing anyone. The next class was swimming lessons, and girls were running around behind a nearby curtain, screaming and laughing as they got changed. Some of them didn't even seem to care if anyone saw them getting dressed. Of course, most of the boys pretended not to care, like, "I don't care about girls, I'm a man's man," and stuff like that, but they were still trying to sneak a peek. "Eh? Ah, yeah, sounds good. But where do you live?" "The apartment complex. We're currently building a house, but it's not finished yet." Memma's parents had moved here before their house was done, it seemed. It seemed they wanted him to start school on the first day so he could quickly make friends. He seemed more concerned with what was behind me, so I turned around and saw Higuchi-san had just taken her shirt off. I panicked and turned back to Memma. Which complex do you live in?" "4th floor of Building 5. "Oh wow, the ghost apartments!" At the time, the apartment complex area, there were nearly 40 buildings in total, was almost totally full. And yet, despite this, there was one building almost empty. Building 5. At night, one building alone was dark, while all the others were lit up brightly. This building was located in the corner of the area, and there was a gloomy shrine right in front of it, as well as a dirty river that went by next to it. Anyway, it seemed his parents were going back to where they previously lived to wrap up some work, so they wouldn't be home that day. That was why he asked us to come over. He didn't want to be home alone. "It's really creepy there at night," he said, and I found myself getting excited. Would there really be ghosts? There had to be. Awesome! When I agreed to go over, Menma looked relieved. He started humming as he got changed. Seemed he was still looking at Higuchi-san's top. I didn't want to seem weak, so I did my best not to look at them. I actually had a weird experience at the ghost apartments before. 2 years prior, I was taking kendo lessons and there was a guy there I didn't like. Whenever we faced each other, he always hit me right in the face, despite the fact I was younger than him. I couldn't stand being paired with him all the time. I only found out that he lived in Building 5 when he and his family died in an unfortunate family pact. The surname on the news was the same one I'd seen written on his protective gear, and it was an incredibly rare name. Being a kid, however, my first thought was, yes, now he won't bully me anymore. I was only young, sure, but I was still a brat. At any rate, there were even books written by famous mediums about how people were visiting from all over the country just to jump to their deaths from that particular building. Thanks to that, according to Memma, The only people who lived in the building were an old lady and some strange old guy who muttered to himself a lot. Either way, I took my good friend Hunda with me, and we went to spend the night at Memma's place. As we pushed our bikes, I asked Memma a few things. At first, there was nothing, he said. But I thought the apartment was kind of creepy. But the new house should be ready soon, so I thought I could put up with it for 3 months. But then, about a week ago, he started to get worked up. Maybe he really was scared, but with everyone focused on him and under the bright summer sun, maybe he no longer felt afraid. And so, he kept going. The other night, I suddenly woke up, right? I looked at the clock and it was after 1. I thought that it was a pretty strange time to wake up, so I closed my eyes. But then I heard a noise coming from the next room, like something scratching the tatami mats or crawling across it. "No way!" Hunda screamed. "That's terrifying," I replied, and we all laughed. Memma seemed kind of proud. Building 5. The apartment complex was rather far from my house, so this was only the second time I'd ever been there. I mean, it was kinda scary. The entirety of the 5th floor was covered in veneer or something, supposedly to stop people from jumping. At least, that's what Hunda, who lived nearby, said. There was no elevator or anything fancy like that. We had to take the dim, narrow stairs all the way up. We were only at the stairs and I was already scared. Before, we were laughing under the bright sun, but now I was already trembling. I mean, this was the famous ghost apartment that had been written about in books. Once again, the reality of the situation hit me in the face like a truck. But I kept quiet and kept climbing. Like, this was where Menma lived, so I could hardly complain about how creepy it was as a visitor. I was his friend, after all. "Here we are," Memma said, opening the door and letting us inside. The old rusty green door opened with a terrible noise. The apartment itself was uncomfortably dark and cramped. It had the same layout as Hunda's apartment, even though he lived in a different building, but his apartment felt much bigger and brighter. There were a few old chests and cupboards in the room. Seemed the furniture had been left behind by the previous occupants. And, being that they were moving into a new house soon anyway, they decided to use it rather than dragging all their stuff up to the 4th floor. I had a thought. Almost nobody lived in this building. So, how many years ago did the previous tenants leave this apartment? Hey, do you have a cassette recorder or something?" Hunda asked. "We do." I brought my camera because my radio cassette player would be too heavy to cart all the way over here, but let's record that crawling sound. Memma and I were impressed with how prepared he was. "Awesome! What if we take a picture too?" "We'll be famous! No way!" "Alright, well, let's take a photo together first." And so we did. Then we went around the room taking photos here and there. At first it was kinda creepy, but with the 3 of us running around, it was suddenly less so. We ate curry that Memma's mother made, and then as we watched anime on TV, we discussed our summer plans. Then we read some comics and talked about girls we liked too. So, if you could touch a girl anywhere, would you choose the top or bottom? "The bottom, of course," Hunda answered Memma's question immediately. After all, that was what made boys and girls different, and even though we were in elementary school, we were still interested in those differences. But Memma replied like we were too stupid to understand. "You idiots. Girls don't have anything there. What's fun about that? It has to be the top. You know what I'm talking about, right?" He was getting worked up, but what he said wasn't a lie. If I could go back now, I'd tell them something like, "That's not true, but we were just kids after all." "Okay, then me too." "Yeah, me too." "Right, it's gotta be that." "You're amazing, Memma." We were impressed with his knowledge on the matter. Well, at any rate, it was around midnight by the time someone said we should finally go to bed. The next day was a Saturday on that note. But even after we laid down, we couldn't sleep. Memma would suddenly fart, making us laugh, and it wasn't around until 1 a.m. that we finally started to doze off. It was quiet, and I figured everyone was either sleeping or listening to the sounds of the insects coming in from the open window. But then suddenly, Memma and Handa spoke at the same time. "Hey, today did you see Higuchi's? Did you hear a noise just now?" "Huh?" Memma swallowed the rest of his sentence and fell silent. I listened closer. There it was. A dragging sound. It was coming from the room next to us, and it was low to the ground. It was like something sliding across the tatami, just like Memma told us at school. Crap, I thought. It was almost like the three of us laughing together just moments before had been a lie. There really was a ghost. Holy crap. "Let's open the doors." Handa went over to the sliding doors and went to open them. I wanted to stop him. Why couldn't he just pretend we didn't hear anything and go back to sleep? But then he opened the doors. The sound was even louder than before. Crap, I can still hear it. "Turn the lights on! The lights!" Memma suddenly turned the bedroom lights on. He pulled the string in a panic, so the lights swung in the air above us. Light then reached the dark room the sound was coming from. On top of an old chest sat a doll casting a strange shadow. Again, that strange sound. "Photo! Camera!" "Hey, isn't the sound coming this way?" I quickly pressed the switch on the cassette recorder. "Something's coming. It never tried to come before now. Why is it coming?" Well, because the doors were open. Up until this point, Memma had never opened the doors and simply hid under his blankets until it stopped. The sliding noise on the tatami mats continued. No, it was something crawling. The sound entered the bedroom and then slowly started going around us. Around and around and around. After a few laps, it stopped right behind Memma and fell silent. 3 of us also fell silent and stared at him. The look on his face suggested he was about to pass out at any moment. It was like he was begging us to do something. I think we stood there like that for about 15 minutes. Then Memma finally spoke. "Is there something behind me?" I leaned around to see, but there was nothing. "Ah!" Suddenly Memma started to twist around. "My back! My back! There's something on my back!" He fell to the ground and started rolling around on the tatami mats. "There's nothing there, Memma." "Yeah, there's nothing there." "Huh?" He looked at us with tears in his eyes. "There's nothing?" "Nothing. You're fine." Okay." He looked at us again. "Come on, let's go to bed," Handa said. "Yeah, we should do that." The 3 of us lay in the corner of the room, still dumbfounded. Before we sleep. Ka-ching! Handa took a photo of Memma and I. "To remember tonight," he said. We laughed dryly to drive away our fears. But then, pop! The 3 of us screamed. The tape had reached its end, and it was the sound of the recording button popping up. When I woke up the next morning, for a moment I didn't know where I was. Then it hit me. I'm at Memma's house. And then I remembered the noises from the night before. Suddenly, I was afraid, and I woke Memma and Hunda up. I didn't want to stay there any longer, so I asked Hunda if he wanted to go home now. But then I suddenly felt bad for Memma. His parents weren't coming back until that evening. "Hey Memma, why don't you come to my place? Let's have breakfast together," I said, and relief washed over his face. Hunda took the photos and then left, saying he was going to get them developed. Several days then passed without incident. I was hanging out with Memma when Hunda arrived with the developed photos. By this point, I was starting to think we had imagined the whole night. "So, is there anything in the photos?" "I haven't looked yet. I thought we should do it together. But the lady at the store laughed and was like, 'You have such a cute younger brother.' She thought you were my younger brother." To tell you the truth, Memma was kind of tiny, and Hunda was extremely tall. But you're not really that cute. We all laughed, and then Hunda took the photos out and spread them out before us. "I don't see anything." Maybe we really did imagine it then. "Oh yeah, the cassette tape. What about that?" "I brought it with me." "Did you listen to it?" "No, I was too scared." I put it in the tape player and pressed play. Crap. Yeah. That sound. We could hear it. It was incredibly small, but we could definitely hear it. At that moment, I noticed a photo Memma had dropped. It must have fallen out of his bag. Memma's face went pale when he saw it. It was the last photo Hunda took of me and him. And on Memma's back was a naked baby looking right at us. The baby's face was pitch black, so we couldn't see any expression on it, other than its bright red open mouth. It seemed to be screaming something. "Cute little brother." That was what the person at the store said. No, this isn't cute at all. Suddenly, a loud noise blared from the tape player. It sounded just like a baby screaming. Then the tape reached its end and suddenly stopped. To be honest, I can still hear that voice from the tape. And even though I hate it, it still reminds me of that night. Whenever that happens, I try instead to remember Higuchi-san and the sight of her tanned skin in her swimsuit. And this isn't really a sequel as such, but a little further information about what happened after that. Apparently, Memma started sleeping in his parents' room after that night. He no longer heard the sound after that. Then, a week or so later, they moved into their new house. As for that apartment complex, apparently the idol Yamada Maria also lived nearby. Memma said he saw her talking about it on TV. We ended up going to different junior high schools after that, but I heard he had lots of other experiences, so maybe I'll ask him out for drinks sometime to hear about it. As for the photo and tape, I slipped them into a gap by that shrine in front of the building. I mean, I was terrified. And as for Hunda, we don't know where he is now. Next up, a young man's relative works as a self-styled spirit medium, but for one particular case she runs into, something that's far beyond her pay grade. Find out what in Michika-san. I have a relative who's known as a psychic. She's pretty well known in her hometown, but other than her real name, most people tend to call her Michika-san. This seems to be a mix of the similar sounding words meaning familiar, unknown, and path. These days, she lives in Hokkaido and is 45. Anyway, she used to work in the office of a real estate company in Tokyo, but for some reason, she suddenly quit. She still refuses to talk about why she quit. She broke up with her husband at the time and he took their children with him. I don't have any sixth sense and I find ghosts terrifying, so I don't really like talking to her. Michika-san, I mean. The first time we spoke, I was in the 4th grade of elementary school, and I was living in Kyoto at the time. At the time, we were visiting Hokkaido, which was where my father used to live. "You live near a park with a graveyard nearby, don't you?" she said to me. Huh? I thought. "You mustn't pay your respects there too much. The spirits will follow you home." This was the first thing she said to me upon our first meeting. I had no idea how she knew about it in the first place, but at the time, my friends often went to the graveyard to pray, so I copied them. Not even my parents knew about that. I stopped going after that. The second time I met her was at my grandfather's funeral in Tokyo. She had come from Hokkaido to attend. I later found out that she was already performing spirit medium type work back in her hometown at the time. And this time she said to me, "You're going to be in for some rough times soon. Yeah. But your deceased grandmother was a good person. Lucky for you, she's protecting you. Your father often struggles as well. But your grandmother, your father's mother, she has this type of power, so everything's going pretty well these days, isn't it?" My grandmother died 2 or 3 years after I was born. Apparently, she really doted on me as a baby. Anyway, I was in the 1st grade of junior high at the time and I felt kinda creeped out by what she said. Why would you say something like that? That was what I thought. Looking back on things now, life wasn't especially bad, but nor was it very good. So, maybe she was right. The 3rd time I saw her was on the anniversary of my grandfather's death. I had a bad feeling about Michika-san ever since I was a kid, so I did my best to avoid talking to her. But after we exchanged glances several times, I felt like I kind of had to. "Oh, hello. Are you well?" It was the first time she'd ever asked me that, so I was a little shocked. "I don't mean to lecture you every time we meet. I'm just concerned, you know?" she said with a smile. "I hear you're working as a spirit medium," I asked her straight out. "Yeah, kind of. Well, it's more like I help people when they ask. I don't usually talk much about myself and it's not like I know that much either. Even if we're related." Liar, I thought. But I didn't say anything. "But you're different." It was like she read my mind. "So, what do they feel like? Spirits, I mean." "What do they feel like? Well, they're all different. But generally, they're the lingering regret of people, you know? There was no way I could know. So it's like some particular feeling from an individual person becomes a spirit. So understanding that feeling is important. But sometimes they're too much. There's nothing I can do." "Like?" I asked. "Do you really want to hear?" Michika-san said, and then she told me the following story. An acquaintance asked Michika-san for help, and so she went to K-Town in Hokkaido. A 14-year-old boy was waiting there for her who had been suffering from mysterious illnesses for the past 2 years. He said that his chest had been incredibly painful for quite some time. Doctors were unable to find the cause of the problem, and it wasn't life-threatening, so they were treating him at home, so as not to rack up hospital expenses. He only went to school if he was feeling well. I was so surprised when I got there, seriously, she said, getting worked up. At first, I knew it had to be a spirit. They asked someone shady like me to visit, after all. The house was an ordinary house with a triangular roof, typical of those you find in Hokkaido. The walls were cream-coloured, and the roof was red. At the time, she didn't sense anything strange from it. But as soon as she went inside, it was like something immediately started crushing her chest. My friend dragged me inside, and the boy's mother was waiting. Of course she was. The boy's father had apparently taken the day off work, and he was sitting by the boy's bed as he slept. So, I introduced myself to her. My name is Michika. At that very moment, I realized something, but I let it go. I wanted to ask what, but she kept going. So, I finally met the boy. As I expected, there was someone in black clothes sitting on his chest. At that exact moment, the father went downstairs to use the toilet. Strange, right? Like I was just about to start the exorcism. Yeah, that really was strange. So when I looked closely at the spirit's face, it looked exactly like his father. I had kind of expected that, but I was still surprised. I asked the mother for some more information, and apparently the boy was her child from a previous marriage. Ah, so that's it, I thought. The mother met the father 3 years prior, and it was her second marriage. The chest pain started a year after that, and it seemed the father didn't like the boy very much. I see. But this was a bit of a problem. I'd never dealt with a living spirit before, and I'd certainly never exorcised one. If it was the spirit of someone deceased, well, that would be no problem. But the living are different. I was thinking about what to do when suddenly the father's spirit attacked me. It glared at me with hate in its eyes and started crushing my chest. I couldn't breathe. Get me out! Get me out! I did my best to scream at my friend through the pain. She took me outside, and once we were out of the house, I could breathe again. So, did you get rid of the living spirit? I gave up. Eh? I mean, I couldn't exactly tell them the father was the problem. That would destroy the family. And I think the boy knew that too. So you just left him like that? No. The father's hatred wouldn't always be that strong. At some point, it would disappear. You know? Are you serious? It wasn't like I was being paid a lot of money for it either. And I wasn't deceiving them either. She laughed. Anyway, jokes aside, if you handle living spirits the wrong way, it can create a real problem. And of course, the living have much stronger feelings than the dead. Later, the boy told her that his parents had gotten a divorce. After that, the pain in his chest disappeared. But the scariest part of that whole story was what Michika-san said last. When my friend took me outside, apparently she saw the father in the living room. He was sitting with his legs beneath him, and he was apparently staring right at us with his eyes wide open. His right hand was sitting on the desk, clenched into a fist and shaking, and the look on his face was just horrifying. When I heard that, I was far more frightened of the living than of some half-baked ghost. Even if you yourself can't see ghosts, it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't around, as the young man in this next story can attest to. Find out why in Uninvited Guest. So, right off the bat, Let me just say that I have no ability to sense the supernatural whatsoever. The other day, I had to visit some famous haunted house back in my hometown for business. I wasn't very familiar with that particular area, so I didn't know much about it, but apparently the previous owner hung themselves from a persimmon tree there. The residence was pretty famous around town. Still, there was somebody living there now. I'll call him A-san. This large rental house had been built about 15 years earlier, but it was too much like a haunted house that A-san had decided to move out. And so I had to visit to deal with the various procedures related to this. "Are you psychic?" he asked at our first meeting. Apparently, those with a sixth sense would stop at the gate and then immediately turn back. A-san himself didn't believe in ghosts, but even so, had still apparently run into them numerous times. Every summer, my goal is always to finally see a ghost this year, but it's something I've never managed to achieve. When I told him this, he looked a little worried. "Well then, you should be okay, I guess." A colleague also from my hometown half joked and told me to take a protective charm with me, but it wasn't every day I got an opportunity like this. Of course, I went to A-san's house empty-handed. "Please tell me if you start to feel unwell," he said. And although it wasn't exactly a threat, he wasn't exactly being considerate either. Anyway, let me tell you how it went. Nothing happened. No goosebumps, no headache. Not a single thing happened to me. I tried jumping from the staircase landing where a woman hung upside down, and laying down in the Japanese-style room where a man covered in blood was said to crawl around. But I felt nothing. At first, A-san looked at me reassuringly, but after a while he was like, "You really are something, huh?" and looked a little fed up. I quietly left the house, but then I thought, wait, something might happen in the car on the way home. As faint hope gripped me, my phone rang. It was my mother, who rarely called me while I was at work. "What does she want?" I thought as I answered. "Where are you now?" she said immediately. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Oh, it's nothing important," was all she would say, and although I live alone now, she then said, "Come drop by and we'll talk." So, after work, I dropped by my parents' house and spoke to my mother about what happened that day. Apparently, she was taking a nap in the living room when she sensed a presence pass by the half-open doors. "Ah, our guest has already arrived," she suddenly thought and jumped up. When she went out into the hall, she saw that same figure entering the Japanese-style room. She rushed over and there she saw a monk sitting alone. And when she entered the room, he started chanting. Feeling grateful, she sat down in front of him and listened. But while she was sitting there, she started to wonder. Was her guest really this monk? Looking closer, the monk was wearing a black robe, and his chants sounded like those given at a funeral. She found that strange, but then she realized she had to make some tea, so she stood up. On the other side of the sliding doors, she saw a figure standing in the hall. She quietly opened the doors and there she saw her father, my grandfather. "You don't need to prepare tea for such a creature as that," he said, and then he disappeared. And that was when she realized that the monk was an uninvited guest. She strongly felt this situation couldn't continue, so she confronted the monk as he chanted. She wasn't sure how much time passed, but the monk stopped chanting. Then he glared at my mother and said a single thing. "Why?" Without hesitation, my mother screamed in reply. "Because he's mine!" Then she woke up in the living room, and she was so worried about me that she called right away. "Ah," I thought, and then I told her what I was doing at the time. "I knew it was your fault," she said, and then suddenly hit me. My mother always had a strong intuition, but like me, she couldn't see ghosts. Apparently, she visits my grandfather's grave a lot these days, and while there, she asked him for protection. "You died before he was born, so please, at the very least, watch over him." I wonder if the reason I can't see ghosts is because of my grandfather. What would you do if you lived alone but suddenly found something cooking in your kitchen? Sometimes the truth is best perhaps left unknown. Find out why in Random Choice. I was sleeping at home and woke up around 10 a.m. I decided to get some breakfast, so I went downstairs, but when I got there, the kettle was already on and some tea was boiling. There was no possible way. I lived alone. Luckily, I noticed the fire from the stairs, so I was quickly able to put it out, and then I rushed back upstairs. I listened closely for any noise, trembling, and then I heard something. I went to sneak a peek and saw the fire had started again. I was so terrified and had no idea what was going on that I just immediately called the police. They arrived before long and quickly caught the criminal. It was my old homeroom teacher from high school. So much time had passed that I'd basically forgotten what he even looked like. And when they questioned him on why he did it, he simply said he chose the name at random from the graduation list. Isn't that terrifying? A young girl is doted on by her mother, but what is it that she keeps in that notebook she always carries around with her? Find out in Mother's Notebook. I'm an only child, and my parents always doted on me. My mother was especially fond of me, and whenever I messed up or did something naughty, she never got angry at me. She always smiled and forgave me. Maybe she was a little too easy on me, but I always loved that about her. One day, I was in the living room watching TV after school when suddenly the phone rang. It was my mother. "Manami, I'm at the supermarket right now. Can you check if there are any carrots in the fridge for me?" "Sure, hang on," I said, and then made my way towards the kitchen. As I was about to open the fridge, something caught my eye. A single notebook on top of it. "What's that?" I thought, but I opened the fridge to check for carrots first. After confirming they were there, I went back and told my mother. After she hung up, I went back to the kitchen and grabbed the notebook. It was an old, tattered thing that my mother had always carried around since I was a child, and I always wanted to know what was inside of it. My mother always smiled and always forgave me, but whenever I did something wrong, I remembered her quickly writing something in the book, something she still did even now. I wanted to know what was in there. Curiosity took over, and I opened the book without an ounce of guilt. On a random page was written, "Manami, today, -3 points. 168 points remaining." Finally this week, this story is a bit of a when you understand mystery, with the truth hidden amongst the story that you yourself must try to uncover. Feel free to join the Kowabana Discord or leave a comment in the YouTube comments to let us know what you think is really going on in this one. This one's called Memento. The first time it happened was when Ayako was walking home from the bus stop after work. She passed a small park and saw the apartment building where she lived alone. But then, suddenly, a figure spoke to her from behind a nearby telephone pole. "You have a mirror in your room, don't you?" Her heart almost jumped out of her chest at this sudden question, but she turned in the direction of the voice. There stood a rather plain woman dressed entirely in either black or brown, slightly hunched over. She had never seen this woman before, but she looked to be in her mid-40s. The woman then continued. "You have a mirror in your room, don't you? About this big." She drew a shape with her fingers. "You should get rid of it. Something bad is going to happen. Is it a memento? If so, that's unfortunate, but you should still get rid of it." Ayako realized the woman wasn't of sane mind and cut her off firmly. "Huh? I don't have anything like that, sorry," she said, and then hurried home. Yet the woman chased after her, as though she hadn't heard anything she said. "I know you do. I'm your neighbor. Your neighbor. Hey, throw it away. Is it a memento? If so, I'm sorry, but you have to get rid of it. You should throw it away tomorrow." Ayako continued to ignore the woman as she waited for the elevator to arrive. "That's enough. I really don't have a mirror," she said, raising her voice. "You're lying. Liar. I know you do. What poor manners you have. You can't hide it. You have a mirror in your room, right? About this big." Again, she drew a shape with her fingers, and then she followed her onto the elevator as well. Ayako was fed up with the woman constantly repeating herself and decided to ignore her. The woman continued to repeat herself until the elevator reached the 7th floor, where Ayako's apartment was. As the doors opened, she ran over to room 708 and quickly unlocked the door. The woman didn't follow her, but she did scream at her from the front of the elevator as Ayako entered the room. "Throw that mirror away! Is it a memento?" Ayako couldn't get what happened out of her mind, so she was barely able to sleep. The next morning, she went to work so exhausted that one of her colleagues even asked her if she was hungover. She managed to get through the day, but then, when she went home, that woman was once again waiting outside the building for her. And she continued repeating the same thing over and over again. "You have a mirror in your room, don't you? About this big," she started. "Is it a memento? A memento?" Ayako decided to ignore her entirely. She unlocked her door and then turned around. "Enough already, please. If you keep doing this, I'm going to call the police," she said. But the woman didn't seem to hear anything she said. "Come on, let me see it. I'll throw it away with you. I'm sorry if it's a memento." Frustrated from her lack of sleep, Ayako finally snapped. "What on earth are you going on about? This is none of your business." The woman continued unabated, her tone indifferent but getting louder. "Mirrors don't just reflect light, you know? They also reflect bad energy. Bad energy is passing through your apartment, but that mirror is reflecting it directly into my room." "Huh? Are you crazy?" "I'm telling you, that's why Ma-kun had an accident and is in the hospital right now. If you don't throw that mirror away, he's going to die. So could you please throw away that mirror? Is it a memento?" Unable to deal with the woman anymore, Ayako flung her door open, slipped inside, and then locked the door behind her. Outside, the woman continued yelling. "Is it a memento? I'm sorry, if so, but..." Ayako turned the lights on and then immediately called the caretaker. Almost in a panic, she told him that her neighbor was acting strange and constantly hassling her, but the caretaker didn't seem to be taking her seriously. Suddenly, her doorbell rang. "See? She's still here. Please come over right now and do something about her. She's crazy." The caretaker replied with a groan. "Well, you see, about your neighbor." Strangely, she heard a man's voice coming from behind the doorbell. "Excuse me. Excuse me." The caretaker continued. Room 707 is simply a mobile phone base station with nothing but equipment in it. Nobody lives there. When the caretaker was done speaking, the man's voice outside continued. That person you were just arguing with! They just jumped off the building! Ayako passed out. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Christina and S-. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Kowabana Volume 12, out on Amazon right now, and check out our newly revamped merchandise store at kowabana.store. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.